Circle of Hope Network, doing life and being church together.
So, welcome back. Welcome. Not quite as sunny today, a little bit of wind, that's okay. Keeps the flies away. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Dr. Dhidi, and we have been going through this series of what we call life colors. Each color presents a different part of ourselves from disease. And of course, the wrong one. Of course, I was trying that out, wasn't I? So let's get back to the right one. Fabulous. Good. So we've done a few of the colors already, haven't we? We've done purple, we've done a bit of the green. Today we're going to try and do two in one, which is the red and the orange, the blood pressure. Anybody with blood pressure or heart disease? Yes, we all do. So I've called this Guard Your Heart. Guard Your Heart. Does anybody recognize this place? Anybody been there? It's far away. The Tower of London, that's right. This is the Tower of London. And the red that you can see, I think I'm going to go to the handheld in a minute. There was an installation whereby they planted 880,000 ceramic poppies. 180,000. I think I'm going to go to this, okay? But this isn't working at all. That's right, 880,000 ceramic poppies. They were planted back in 2014. And that was to commemorate the start of what they called the Great War. We now call it the First World War, but they called it the Great War because they didn't know another one was coming. And so they planted 880,000 ceramic poppies to represent the 880,000 British soldiers that died during the war. Now, during that war, there was a president in the United States, Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson really didn't want to get involved with the Great War. He wanted to keep America out of it. But eventually he was convinced to go in. And when the war was over, he and some of the leaders of Europe said, you know, we should set up a society so that we never go to war again. They called it the League of Nations. And all the Europeans, they agreed with it. But when Woodrow Wilson went back to the United States, none of the Americans wanted to be involved. They said, no, 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 leave that to the Europeans. We don't want to be involved. So the Europeans started the process of the League of Nations, but Woodrow Wilson said, look, I can convince the American people to join the League of Nations. Sadly, Woodrow Wilson had a stroke. His stroke was so severe that he couldn't do really anything in office. His wife did everything. She was really the first female president of the United States. So Woodrow Wilson couldn't convince America to join the League of Nations. The Europeans, therefore, took all the punishment out on the Germans. The Germans were to blame for this war. We're going to make you suffer. The Germans were then treated like second-class citizens. And then, of course, along came this gentleman who said, no, we're not second-class citizens. We're going to rule this world. I always think to myself, if Woodrow Wilson never had a stroke and he was able to convince the Americans to join the League of Nations, perhaps the Americans could have made the European leaders softer on the Germans, and maybe this gentleman wouldn't have a foothold. I say this because one man's health or one person's health doesn't just affect the individual. It affects the family. It affects a community. It can affect your country, even the entire world, as was the case with Woodrow Wilson. Often people say to me, well, Dr. Dhidi, I understand what you're saying, but it's my life. I can do whatever I want with it. And I say, well, maybe that's true, but when we get sick, who is it that has to take us to the hospital? Who is it that's affected by it? It's our family, it's our friends, it's our work, everything. No man or woman is an island. We're all interconnected. So getting back to this topic, guard your heart. It comes from Proverbs 4:23, when King Solomon said, above all things, guard your heart with all diligence, for out of it spring the issues of life. The heart really is a remarkable organ. You know, from before you are born, it starts pumping. Now, we know that in the heart, it just pumps blood around the system. What you find here is that when blood comes from the rest of the body, it comes into the heart via the right atrium. This is the right atrium. So there's not much oxygen in the blood, goes down into the right ventricle. This ventricle is a big muscular chamber which then wants to push the blood up through these pulmonary arteries. Pulmonary because the arteries are leading to the lungs. This is where the blood becomes oxygenated. And then when it's oxygenated, the blood comes back to the heart through the left atrium into this left ventricle. And then eventually, the left ventricle pushes the blood all the way out to all parts of the body via the aorta. It's a perfect working system. When your heart stops working, you stop working. You may not realize this, but your heart pumps blood at 60 miles an hour through your system. You have 60,000 miles of vessels in your body. There is so much going on. But you know what? Sometimes the heart goes wrong. And often the biggest factor is heart disease. This is still the biggest killer, certainly in the Western world. Just under half of the people who die prematurely die because of heart disease. It costs huge amounts of money in Britain, Europe, US, Canada, and it's increasingly becoming a problem in the emerging economies. Some of the African nations, the Middle East, India. So it's a big problem. In Britain, it costs about £20 billion every single year. Now, what on earth is heart disease? This is what it looks like. So on the right, on the left here, you can see these perfect arteries. This is just like your arteries, I'm sure. Lovely, free-flowing blood just passes through with no resistance. And on the right, you can see these plaques that start to form in the arteries. This is where the cholesterol and fat form. So the blood now has to squeeze its way through a narrow factor. And when it's that narrow, it's very difficult for the blood to oxygenate all the places where it needs to go. And people say, well, why do we get it? Why do we get this? Is it genetic? This is the big question I always hear. Is heart disease genetic? Basically, what they're asking, is it my parents' fault? You know, is it my parents' fault that I have heart disease? Well, I always say, I go back to the Garden of Eden with this. I say, look, don't blame anybody. You know what happened in the Garden of Eden, right? God blamed Adam. Adam blamed Eve. Eve blamed the serpent. And the serpent didn't have a leg to stand on. It's never good to blame. When I was at medical school, there were certain things you had to understand. You could not graduate from medical school if you didn't understand, for example, what were the signs of a heart attack. Also, you needed to understand the first signs of heart disease. What are the first signs of heart disease? Well, let me tell you. The first signs of heart disease are this. If you're living a life like this, gentlemen, you already have the first signs of heart disease. If you are inactive, poor diet, stressed out all the time, overweight, smoking and drinking, even if you have no symptoms in your body, you already have the first signs of heart disease. Back in America, you remember the Vietnam War, right? The Vietnam War. Do you know the average age of the soldiers in the Vietnam War? 19, that's right, 19. But when many of those soldiers were killed and they were brought back to America and they had their autopsies, they found that these 19-year-olds had severe heart disease. Severe heart disease. Some of their arteries were nearly completely occluded. We know that children, even sometimes babies, already have the beginnings of fatty streaks in their arteries. That is down to our lifestyle. That is what we're feeding them and what they're not doing in terms of their activity. Let me introduce you to a gentleman who I spent some time working with, Esselstyn Caldwell. Some of you may have heard of him. Well, he, like me, started off as a surgeon. But he said, you know what, like me, I'd much rather prevent people from getting sick than just take bits out of people and replace them with new bits. What he did, he took 18 patients, all with severe heart disease. And in the 8 years previous to the experiment, they had a combined number of 49 cardiac events between them. What does that mean? That means they may have had chest pain, heart attacks, strokes. So of those 18 patients, they had 49 cardiac events. All he did was change their diet. Okay, so when he changed their diet, he changed it to a plant-based, low-fat, no animal fat, low-sugar diet. What did he find? Within a few months, their cholesterol was halved. Many people are still taking these cholesterol tablets, you know, statins. They seem to be prescribed to everybody. Well, just by changing your diet, you halve your cholesterol. Fantastic. The 11 years after the experiment, they had no cardiac events between them. Not one. No chest pain, no strokes, no heart attacks. And one of the most interesting things is that they showed that these arteries that were nearly occluded had now reversed. They've now started to open up. I'll show you what this means. This is an angiogram. This angiogram, this is when you inject somebody with some dye and it shows you the arteries in the heart. And here, on this side, you can see a little narrowing. This is where the cholesterol is building up. On this side, it's perfectly normal. Now, when I was training in surgery, I did cardiothoracic surgery as well. If I presented this to my colleagues, they would say, Chidi, that's a fantastic operation, well done. This was achieved just with a change of diet. You know, this is actually quite miraculous, because today, still in medical schools all around the world, they're telling people that if you have heart disease, the only way you can cure it is have a stent. And if the stent doesn't work, you have open heart surgery. I don't know if you've ever seen open heart surgery. That's brutal surgery. You know, you get one of these Black & Decker saws and you open up the chest. And I remember the first time I was asked to do it, my hand slipped a little bit, but, you know, we sorted it out. These things happen, you know. Doctors are not perfect. You know, I'm confessing to you. But it's a huge operation. You have to stop the heart. You have to bypass the heart and put it into a machine that's about half the size of a room, just so that the person can stay alive. It's a massive undertaking. What I'm saying to you is you can avoid that just by changing your diet. That's amazing. This is what we need to know, right? And this is the interesting thing. That took about 18 months to progress, to look like that. But within weeks, the chest pain goes away. Now, in England, if I want to see a cardiologist, it will take me 2 or 3 weeks to see a cardiologist. You change your diet, your chest pain goes away before you see the cardiologist. Amazing. Absolutely amazing. So this is the way to open up the arteries, just by changing your diet. I remember I was working in accident and emergency. You call it the emergency room here. And one gentleman had survived a heart attack. And I saw him the next morning. And next to his bed, he had 3 packets of cigarettes. So I said to him, okay, so you're holding on to the cigarettes because you're just keeping them as a memento of your previous life. He said, no, I'm going out for a smoke in a minute. I said, but, you know, don't you recognize there's a link between the cigarette smoke and your heart disease? He said, no, doctor. I had a heart attack because my dad had a heart attack. And he had a heart attack because his dad had a heart attack. I was always going to have a heart attack. You know, this is the blame culture that we convince ourselves. It's not genetics. You may hear from some physicians that, oh, it runs in the family. But if they say it's genetic, I would ask you to ask them, have you yet found the gene for heart disease? We have not found it. It is a lifestyle problem. The reason why it runs in families is because we have the same diets, we have the same attitudes, we have the same stresses and behaviors. That's what's passed down, not the genes for heart disease. Now, one of the big triggers for heart disease is high blood pressure. We call it hypertension. Now in England and in the US and Canada, you have about a third of the adult population with high blood pressure. It's amazing. If you go to Nigeria, I would say 100% of the population has high blood pressure. Everybody's stressed out there. The normal blood pressure must be 120/80, right? And what does that mean? What that means is the systolic pressure, the 120, is the high pressure when your heart is pumping out the blood fast out of the heart. That's the maximum pressure of your system. The diastolic pressure, the low pressure, is when your heart is now relaxed. So this is your heart at rest. Ideally, what we should be aiming for is about 110/70. 120/80 is the maximum. You know, that's the speed limit. I get people saying to me, oh, I went to the doctors, my blood pressure was fine. I say, what was your blood pressure? Oh, it's 140/90. That is too high. When I first went to medical school, I went to medical school in the 80s. I know I don't look that old. Right? I went to medical school in the 80s, and my tutors then were telling us that normal blood pressure is 100 plus your age. It just didn't make any sense then. So if I reach 90 years old, my blood pressure should be 190. Makes no sense at all. And you go around the world, you go to civilizations in Africa and Asia, where they don't have the same diets as us. No matter how old people get, they can be over 100, their blood pressure is still 110/70. That's how we're supposed to be. It is not a disease of aging to have high blood pressure. We should all be free of high blood pressure. I was in Loma Linda a few years ago, and I was being driven around by a lady who was 104 years old. And she kept saying to me, Dr. Chidi, I feel as sexy today as when I was 102. I have no idea why she was telling me that, but... why do we actually get hypertension? Why do we get hypertension? Look, if you go to your doctors will tell you that 95% of hypertension is essential hypertension. What on earth does essential hypertension mean? Essential hypertension means that the doctor doesn't know why you've got high blood pressure. That's what we do. As doctors, this is what we do. We give things that we don't understand a long name, and everybody thinks that we're bright and brainy. You go to your doctor, you say you've got back pain. Your doctor will tell you, don't worry, it's lumbago. Lumbago. You go home and say, oh, my doctor said I've got lumbago. Lumbago is just Latin for back pain. You know, this is what we do. This is what we do all the time. So if we don't understand something, we just give it a long name. It's essential hypertension. We don't know what causes high blood pressure. But actually, every doctor will be able to tell you there are risk factors for high blood pressure. There are risk factors, and they're like this, aren't they? Family history of high blood pressure, Afro-Caribbean, male or female after the menopause, being obese, diabetic, a smoker, high salt, stress, or a sedentary lifestyle. We know that these things can be risk factors for high blood pressure. Everybody knows that. I don't think you need a medical degree to understand something, that the risk factors are in fact the causes. It's not rocket science. The risk factors are the cause. It's our lifestyle that causes the blood pressure. Now I see some of you are looking at them saying, well, some of them don't seem very fair. For example, family history of hypertension. We talked about that. Doesn't mean that you have to have high blood pressure. It just means if you do the same things that everybody in your family does, you're more likely to get it. Afro-Caribbean in origin. Why on earth should Afro-Caribbeans have higher blood pressure than everybody else? Well, what's the reason for that? Diet? Is their diet different to everybody else? Not really. Not diet. It's not slavery either. It's, look, people from Africa and the Caribbean come from hot countries. If you come from a hot country, you are going to perspire a lot. You say perspire up here, we say sweat back home. I don't know. Yeah, you say sweat as well. So you sweat quite a lot. Now, if you do not want to dehydrate, you're going to have to try and hold on to some of that water. How do you hold on to the water? You hold on to salt. Where salt goes, water follows. So then if you come into a society that has high salt levels, like North America, Europe, you are going to be much more sensitive to salt and you have a higher risk of getting high blood pressure. What's the solution? The solution is don't have much salt in your diet, then everybody's the same. Okay, now male, if you're a male, yes, we have a higher risk of high blood pressure. That's because females have that wonderful hormone we were talking about yesterday, estrogen. Estrogen does have many good benefits as well, and that is it protects the heart and keeps your blood pressure and heart disease at bay. I always think about hypertension not as a disease, but just as a warning sign. It's a warning sign because it's telling you there are lots of things going on in your body that if you don't look after yourself will get really, really bad. It's a bit like when I bought my first car. I think I probably used every last penny to buy the car. So if anything went wrong with that car, I had no money to sort it out. So warning lights were going off left, right, and center. I had no money to pay for them, so I just had to ignore them. Until one day, the engine just gave up on me. You know, if you've ever been to the middle of London on Oxford Street, where everybody's busy, my car decided that it would pack up then. Everybody's crowding around, steam coming out of the engine. I had to get somebody to tow the car away. It became incredibly expensive for me with money that I didn't have. And this is the same thing with high blood pressure. It's a warning sign because if you don't deal with it, it leads to more serious problems. You see, if you have high blood pressure, and perhaps it's caused by stress, for example, those hormones that are being released into your system, yes, they cause high blood pressure, but also they're predisposing you to many of these diseases and more. Cancer, we spoke about it yesterday. We said that our immune system destroys cancer. Well, when you're stressed, did you know that your immune system gets wiped out? If you have one of those arguments that make you shake, you know those ones I mean. For 24 hours, your immune system is just about wiped out. Now imagine if you're living a life of stress with a poor immune system. You have a higher risk of getting cancer. Obviously, anxiety and depression, and we'll be talking about that tomorrow. Alzheimer's disease. I think more people are afraid of Alzheimer's disease than any disease known to man right now. And that is because Alzheimer's disease, the biggest cause of it is stress. So if you're not dealing with it, you have a higher risk of getting disease. IBS and IBD, irritable bowel syndrome and inflammatory bowel diseases, these are diseases of stress. So if your lovely doctor gives you a lovely pill to lower your blood pressure, that doctor hasn't dealt with the underlying cause. That doctor hasn't yet dealt with what's coming down the line if you don't change your lifestyle. So lifestyle is 100% key. So let's look at some of the things that we can do with our lifestyle. Let's look at diet. Diet. So we know that a healthy plant-based diet, a simple, healthy plant-based diet will reduce anybody's blood pressure. In fact, there was a study done in California and Harvard, and it showed if you have a high diet full of fruits, vegetables, legumes, no sugar, no animal products, it doesn't matter who you are, it will lower your blood pressure. Absolutely. Now here's something quite interesting. Greens are very important in blood pressure. Very interesting that those dark green vegetables, when you digest them and they go through your bloodstream, they stimulate the interior of your arteries to release a chemical. That chemical is called nitric oxide. Nitric oxide. By the way, nitric oxide is the active ingredient of Cialis or Viagra. So I can see the women writing down now. The gentlemen are saying, well, I've never heard of this drug. What is this? I've never had such a need of such a drug. But actually, yes, so dark green vegetables, they actually stimulate your body to release nitric oxide, opens up the arteries. That's actually how Cialis and Viagra work. It opens up the arteries. So as I always say, like Popeye, if you want to be strong to the finish, eat your spinach. Some people understand what I'm talking about. Okay, fine. There are children here. I will not elaborate. I will not elaborate. Okay, fabulous. The next thing you have to do, you must exercise. We can't go through life without exercise. I was listening to somebody the other day, and they were talking about how exercise is a wonderful drug. It's the supreme, ultimate drug. Given what exercise can do for your body, if we could have a pill that could do what exercise could do, we would make billions. But exercise is the key. It lowers your blood pressure, makes you feel good. And I always say, do low-intensity exercises. Walking, right? Walking. If you have a problem with high blood pressure, please don't go out and try sprinting and weight training and all that stuff. Just gentle walking. There are these trends now, for some of these gyms, they do high-intensity training because that means you can only do 7 minutes of exercise a day. Well, here's the problem. When you do high-intensity exercise, your blood pressure has to shoot up. If you already have high blood pressure, you can get a stroke. So don't do any high-intensity exercise until your blood pressure is nice and low. Walking, there is nothing better than walking. People say to me, well, I can't spend an hour a day walking. I'm too busy. I've got the children. I've got work. Look, I mean, we can be intelligent about this. You know, for me, if I go for a walk, sometimes I'll go with my wife. So I'm having family time and walking at the same time. So we can be walking, talking, we can be praying at the same time. We can have quality prayer time together. You're doing 3 things in one, right? So we can be intelligent about managing our time, but you have to spend the time. For those people who think you can never make the time, you know, if you have a stroke and you're in hospital, you'll have all the time in the world. So either you have the time now or you have the time later. Absolutely. Someone's laughing at a stroke, I see. Okay, fair enough. I'm joking. That's fine. But look, let's get back to where we started, because this is what King Solomon had to say. Above all things, guard your heart with all diligence, for out of it spring the issues of life. This is a fascinating text, folks. Fascinating. Even from a medical point of view. You see, up until the year 1624, we never knew what the function of blood was. We didn't know. People were dying in battle, blood was spurting out, but nobody knew what blood did. You know, the thing that issues out of the heart, we knew that. It issues out of the heart, but we didn't know what it did. This text tells us that the thing that issues out of our heart gives life. Gives life. That's where life comes from. Life to the tissues. Blood gives life to the tissues. And William Harvey, down in England, discovered this, looking at the Bible. So way back then, way before modern medicine, King Solomon told us something very interesting about medicine. But this text tells us something even deeper. It tells us that the issues in life do not come from my bad neighbor, from my spouse, from my children. The issues in my life come from my own heart. The issues don't come from outside, because we're all going to be in different situations. The issue comes from my own heart. Let me give you an example. So I've been married now 18 years. The first year of marriage can be a little bit of an adjustment. Let's say that. Okay, none of you people. It's just me. Is that right? Your marriages are always been fine, plain sailing. Okay, well, I'm in good company. I'm in good company. That's great. But look, for me, I found the first year of marriage quite difficult. And there was one thing that really got me about my wife, and that is every time she left the room, she would leave the light on. So we're in a small flat. Every time she left the room, the light would be on. I'd come back, and all the lights in the flat would be on. And I would say to her, please, could you just remember, when you leave the room, to turn the light off? And I would demonstrate how to turn the light off. It was my first year. It was my first year, right? Yes, it didn't go down well. But what I would find is that no matter what I said, the lights would be left on. We lived in a place called Hampstead in North London, lovely place, and I was working in a hospital just up the road. And I was working in the emergency room, and I used to do a shift from 6 in the evening to 2 o'clock in the morning. Horrible shift, you know. You're going to work when everybody's coming home, not very nice. So 2 o'clock in the morning, I'm walking home. Everywhere is pitch black. Now I'm walking down the hill, and I just see this beam of light coming out of my flat. And I can feel my blood pressure rising within me. Why doesn't she listen to what I have to say? Doesn't she respect me? But one day I said to myself, look, I'm actually getting nowhere. I think what I should do is give up on complaining about the lights. Let's just stop talking about it. I mean, how much does it cost for light bulbs to be on anyway? Just forget about it. I tell you what, that very day, the light started to go off. And I'm saying to myself, okay, so I spend years talking about it, nothing happens. I stop talking about it, and the lights go off. And I realized, you know, my perpetual moaning about the lights was causing her to have stress. And because she was stressed, she keeps forgetting to turn the lights off. When I left it alone, she wasn't stressed. The lights went off. She didn't have the problem. I had the problem. The problem was not with her, it was with me. When I changed myself, then my life got better. The issues didn't come from my wife, it came from my own heart. When we're always looking around at other people saying, well, you know what, if only I could change them, then I'd be happy. We have a problem. Often we need to look at ourselves. What do I need to change to improve? Because if I change, then maybe my life will get better. If I change, then maybe my stresses will go away. If my stresses go away, maybe then I'm able to do some of those things that God wants me to do. To be kind, to be generous, to be peaceful, to be loving. When I get rid of my own stress. I need the sound. Yeah. No sound?
เขาจะได้อะไรถ้าเขาทำแบบนี้ทุกวันเขาจะไม่ได้อะไรเลยไม่ได้รวยขึ้นไม่ได้ออกทีวีไม่มีใครรู้จักไม่ได้มีชื่อเสียงที่มากขึ้นเพราะสิ่งที่เขาได้คือได้แค่ความรู้สึกได้เห็นความสุข ได้ความรักได้ในสิ่งที่เงินซื้อไม่ได้ได้โลกที่สวยงามกว่าเดิมในชีวิตคุณอะไรคือสิ่งที่คุณต้องการมากที่สุด
So when you're watching that, you actually feel good just watching it. Now just imagine if you're literally doing it yourself. Think of the changes that are going to take place in your body. We know, and it's been well proven, that people who are loving, kind, gentle, forgiving, they live longer and they live better than everybody else. Sometimes when it seems that, why is that person letting somebody get away with that? You know what? They choose not to hold on to that stress. Holding on to a lot of stress and bitterness leads us not just to an early grave, but leads us to a miserable life. That's really one of the reasons why God wants us to forgive, why God wants us to love more. So we're going to find out, tomorrow we're going to look at depression and anxiety. And on Friday we will look at the art, really, of forgiveness. But if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them now.
I just wanted to thank you for sharing that story about the lights in the house, because my husband's not a Christian man, and I've always tried to change him, and it caused a lot of stress in my life. And it wasn't until recently that I decided I'm not going to change him anymore. I'm just going to leave it up to God, and I'm going to just keep praying for him, and I'm going to be a good wife to him. And I felt all that relief, and I felt better about a lot of things after that, and our relationship is getting so much better.
Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing that, because it's a true fact. I mean, I'm not into marriage counseling right now. I'm not here for that right now, but there is a common theme in marriage, and that is that women believe that they are going to change this gentleman in front of them. They can mold this man into what they really want. It never works. It never works. In fact, the only way it can ever happen is just what you said. When you say, well, look, okay, he is not the problem. I'm going to change myself. That allows the man to change. I'm being very one-sided here, right? I apologize for this. I'm being one-sided. But it allows the man to change himself without being told, you must do this, you must do that. This works with everyone, men, women, children, simply trying to force them to be something that they're not never works and causes more stress. So yes, thank you for sharing. Who has?
Dr. Dhidi, could you talk a little bit about enabling?
What do you mean, enabling?
We talk here about aiding and abetting, like enabling somebody to continue in something that they're doing that maybe you're not happy with, like they're wasting money and you keep giving them more money.
Yes. Oh, I see what you mean. Yes, thank you. And you're talking about it in context of what we're saying, you can't change the person. Is that right? Okay, so in terms of the kindness. So sometimes when we say, Jesus said that the meek shall inherit the earth. The meek shall inherit the earth. And I don't know, I don't see a lot of people on their list of things that they want to be as meek. I don't find many people say, yeah, meekness is what I'm really after. But maybe because it sounds a bit like weakness. But it's not really weakness. Meekness is, I like the definition of having strength under control. Strength under control. And the reason why I'm saying that is because just because you're kind to somebody, that doesn't mean that you're just going to let them do everything they want to do. To be kind to somebody is to be able to say, well, some of the things you're doing are very dangerous to you and to the rest of the people around you. So I'm not going to enable you to do that. I'm going to be kind to you, but I'm going to cut you off. I'm going to cut off this supply if you're going to use it to buy drugs. That's kindness. I don't see how kindness can be still giving the person money to fritter it away on all sorts of other things. Kindness, meekness, it is not about just letting people run all over you. You know, one of the other Beatitudes says, blessed are the peacemakers. Well, being a peacemaker doesn't mean that you're going to live in peace with everybody. You know, peacemakers all over the world, they have to be very tough. They have to stop people from fighting each other. That requires some resolve, some toughness. So it's not about just allowing people to do whatever they want. It's about knowing where you are and knowing what is good for that individual. It's not just about letting them do whatever they want to do. Yes.
I have two questions. The first one is about salt. Ellen White says that we need salt to make good blood. Is like Himalayan salt and Celtic salt, those are...
Himalayan salt and Celtic salt. So this is the salt where they climb those mountains and they find this pink-tinted salt, and they come back and they sell it to us and say, well, this is worth 10 times what you would pay for normal salt because I've climbed up a mountain to get it. Salt is actually salt. Okay, so salt is, wherever it's from the Himalayas or from the darkest parts of Africa, it will still shoot your blood pressure up. Now, Himalayan salt, when it's got its pink tint and it's got some cobalt and other minerals in it, that's fine, but it will still shoot your blood pressure up. No point in wasting your money getting expensive salt. Just cut down the amount of salt. And when you say, Ellen White talks about, you know, you need to have salt in your blood, absolutely. But, you know, natural foods have their own salts. So, for example, the fruits that we eat has loads of potassium, okay? So those are minerals that make salts in the blood. You don't have to, doesn't mean we have to shake that salt shaker over our food in order to be healthy and have good blood. Your next question.
It's about low blood pressure.
Yeah.
If you could address that.
So if you have low blood pressure, for most of the time, I would just say, praise the Lord, because you have low blood pressure. Unless it's actually causing you symptoms when you're dizzy or you get palpitations. If you get those sort of symptoms, then you have to be checked out because you may have anemia or other problems. But if you just have reasonably low blood pressure, just thank God.
Yesterday you mentioned about we had vegetables, greens and beans as a diet. And today you said change your diet. Now, what progression of, you said approximately 2 weeks on the vegetables, greens and beans. How do you progress from that 2-week period down to when can you introduce what?
Okay,
and so on and so forth.
Remember, the beans, greens, and vegetables was to reverse type 2 diabetes. That's what it was for. Beans, greens, and vegetables is to reverse type 2 diabetes. After 2 weeks, you can then start to introduce things like fruit or whole grains, rice, but this is all under the monitoring of your doctor because you're giving him or her the readings of your blood sugars and your blood pressures every day. But don't think that that strict diet of beans, greens, and vegetables is for everybody. It's to reverse type 2 diabetes.
So how do you start otherwise without worrying about your diabetic problems?
How do you start?
Well, how do you start the diet to make these life colors be effective?
Okay, so depending... Okay, let's go to this. So depending on the color that you are involved in. So for example, if you have an autoimmune disease, you will find out, those of you who have the DVDs, you'll find out that there are some things that are specific to your diet. So definitely no milk, no wheat, no refined sugar. That's slightly different to if you are just trying to reverse type 2 diabetes. So that's why we call them different colors, because there are different tracks. One diet is not specific for another diet. You have to go along the right track.
So I have a friend who doesn't like to go to the doctor, and she has a resting heart rate of between like 95 and 105, and that's like after a nap. And she's in her early 40s. But her blood pressure is basically normal. Is that a concern? Is that something that she should be seen about, or is that just normal for her?
No, it's not normal. That does need to be looked at. So if her blood pressure is normal and her pulse is quite high, that's just telling us that, well, you're not getting enough blood to where it needs to go. That's why your heart has to beat quicker. So that could be that she's anemic, so there's lower levels of hemoglobin in her blood, so the body compensates, or it could be other issues, but she certainly needs to be checked out. If she doesn't like to go to a doctor, allow a doctor to come to her. All right? We do house calls still.
I have 2 questions.
Yes.
You spoke about water and how important it is, and that's what I drink all the time. I love water.
Yeah.
However, water is a problem because I'm from Saskatoon, and there has been a study done on our city water saying it has drugs in it from people dumping their expired prescriptions in, and they can't filter it all out, so that it still is there. Is there a specific filter or a specific type of water we should be drinking? I know water's water, and people look at me like I'm weird, but...
No, that's actually a useful comment, because in most modern societies, all of us have taken cocaine, we have taken all sorts of medication, because some of it is still in the water. Now, how much of it is in the water, that's the question. I mean, it's minuscule. It's not something you should even really worry about. I've been to California. I could never drink the California water because it tastes so foul. But for most around here, I could drink their water, no problem. I wouldn't even worry about it. There are drugs, but it's so small, I wouldn't even worry.
Okay, my second question is on Monday you spoke about 2 meals a day.
Yes.
How far apart, how late at night what's the latest you should eat?
Yes, and the reason for 2 meals a day is because it gives you a nice gap during the day. You feel a bit hungry, that's fantastic. Usually we try to say, if you can have your last meal before 6 o'clock, that's perfect. Okay, so it gives you some time, a good few hours before you go to bed, to empty out your bowels and everything, and you'll sleep a lot better too. 6 o'clock is a good aim. Some of us can't reach there yet, I know that. I've always had a problem with that myself. Yes.
I'm going to try to combine 3 questions into one.
3 questions?
Yeah, this is
wow.
A left turn into Crohn's disease. What is the benefit of something like wheatgrass juice, aloe vera juice, or apple cider vinegar?
Well, they have many different benefits. I would say, apple cider vinegar has been used for many different things, lowering cholesterol, reversing gallstones and things like that. That's fine. Wheatgrass juice. Look, juices, I don't promote a lot of juices. I'll tell you this. One of the reasons being is because when God put us in the Garden of Eden, he didn't put us with buckets of juice everywhere. He designed the fruit for us to eat. And there's a reason for that. Our bodies are designed to eat fruit and drink water. That's what they're designed to do. If you have a glass of orange juice, this much of orange juice, that probably has about 7 oranges worth of juice in it. Now, none of us eat 7 oranges in a grow because it's naturally designed to stop us eating so much and getting so much sugar. Having the juice is very easy to get down, but it has so much sugar in it. So I tend to avoid any kind of juice. But those wheatgrasses, they have high levels of chlorophyll, there's lots of magnesium, there's all sorts of goods in there, but so long as you're not taking so much sugar at the same time. Yes?
What is the correlation between wheat and the autoimmune disease?
Right, okay. I'm just thinking if I have a bit of time to... Yeah, I'll explain. If you speak to your doctor, anybody who has an autoimmune problem, you speak to your doctor and you say, well, why do I have lupus or rheumatoid arthritis? And they'll say, oh, we don't know. But we do know. We've known for many, many years. The biggest cause is that there are certain proteins that have been able to get through into your through your gut without being properly digested, and they get into your bloodstream. This happens because we have a leaky gut sometimes. When we're stressed, if we're on certain drugs, larger molecules can slip through. When that happens, your good immune system identifies these weird proteins as foreign agents and then wants to destroy them, and it does destroy them. Now, once it's destroyed these proteins, it then looks for anything in your body that has a similar protein code. So it may come across your nervous system and start to attack it, causing you multiple sclerosis, may attack your joints, your thyroid gland. So it's the protein code on the wheat that is very toxic, or that really stimulates a lot of our antibodies. Is the protein code in certainly cow's milk does exactly the same thing. So wheat and dairy products we tend to eliminate completely. And by completely, I mean, I used to have people say to me, oh, I just had some milk in my tea a few weeks ago, not much. No, you have to eliminate it completely, because it only takes a little bit of that protein to stimulate your immune system. Just like having a vaccine. When you have a vaccine, you have a small amount put into your system, and that sensitizes your whole body. So you have to completely eliminate it. Okay. Yes.
There is one question about MSG, or monosodium glutamate, in relation to hypertension. Can you explain about it?
Yeah, I can, but I don't want to be here doing a Viva like I'm back in medical school, but I will explain this. Monosodium glutamate is the big word, right? So glutamate, any of you who've ever done pharmacology will know that glutamate, when it binds to one of your nerves, it will excite your nerve, and it will cause it to have lots of calcium to rush in, and it stimulates the nerve. A bit like what coffee and caffeine does, right? So monosodium glutamate stimulates your nerve, and that raises your blood pressure, because your arteries then start to close down, and when they close down, it decreases the volume, and therefore raises your blood pressure. All right? Good.
When you're measuring blood pressure, you have the two numbers, the upper number and the lower number. Is one of them more serious than the other?
Okay, that's a good question. Which is more serious, the systolic pressure, the upper figure, or the lower figure, the diastolic? And you know what? It's gone back and forth in science over the years. In the ancient days, when I was a medical student, the upper number was the one that was really considered severe, because that top number, if it goes up to 200, it could burst a blood vessel. Then over the years, we found that the diastolic pressure became very intriguing, because it really tells you how stressed you are. Right, so if your heart is at rest and the number is still high, that tells you that you are under a lot of stress still. So both of them are significant, that's what I'm telling you. But the top one tells you your cardiovascularly, how fit you are. The bottom one tells you how stressed you are.
Yes, sir. They said that if we are not vegetarian, we will not be saved. Is that correct?
You will not be saved. Is that what you said? If you're not vegetarian, you won't be saved. Is that it?
Yes.
Yes, okay, yeah. Oh, that's interesting. I've not heard that one for a long time. Yeah, I used to have that in my church an awful lot. Until I started reading the book of John, and the last meal that Jesus and his disciples had before he was ascended to heaven was a fish sandwich. You remember that, right? Jesus was there, he said, come on, bring the fish, let's have some bread, and he went up to heaven. If it's good enough for Jesus, it's good enough for me. Look, this is very important. Sometimes you have people like me coming and saying, this is what you must eat, this is what you mustn't eat. We're talking about health principles. We're talking about health principles. It is not the same as saying, if you eat this, we could start saying that a donut will send you to hell. This is nonsense, right? Yes, there are certain things we do that are not healthy for us, okay? By the way, eating fish is not a big issue. I'm not saying that you can't eat meat. God tells us the meat that we can eat and that we can't eat. But the problem is, with the fish today, we can't get rid of the mercury. We can't get rid of the impurities out of the fish. This is a health issue. That is not an issue of salvation, unless anybody wants to tell me different. But as I say, if it was good enough for Jesus, it's good enough for me. I don't eat fish, but I'm certainly not going to condemn somebody who does. Yes?
In regards to low blood pressure, what is a dangerous low blood pressure?
Okay, a dangerous low blood pressure is if your systolic is below 90. That's what we usually say. If your systolic, the upper number, is below 90, yeah, you should get it checked out. Doesn't mean that you're necessarily unwell, but you should have it checked out. Anyone's hand? Are we finished? Okay. Okay, no, we got one. Just wait for you.
You talked about the top number with systolic, dystolic. What about the bottom number?
Yeah, I mean...
You said below 90 for the top number. What about the bottom one?
Yeah, I mean, that one's more difficult to say for a lower figure because, for example, my diastolic blood pressure can go down to below 50 sometimes, and sometimes if you're quite fit, that can happen. So it's not quite as severe, and I'll tell you why it's not quite as severe, is because your systolic pressure, the upper one, that's the one that's actually keeping your arteries open, that's the one that's perfusing your brain. So that's the one that doctors worry about. The diastolic pressure, I've never seen anyone worry about that at all. We only really look at the systolic, but maybe there's a research product in that question.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great. Okay, so we're coming to the end. I think we've got time for a couple of more questions. Yes. See, you're getting some exercise here. It's demonstration.
Can you correlate a little bit of heart rate with blood pressures?
Heart rate and blood pressure. Yeah, okay, that's a good one. Heart rate, the heart rate should be between 60 and 80. 60 and 80 beats per minute. That's usually the healthy range. If you can get your heart rate lower than 60, that's fantastic, actually. Some of these well-trained athletes, their heart rates are 35 or 45. That's because their hearts are so efficient. But when, as was mentioned earlier, when the heart rate goes up, that's telling you that your heart, for some reason, is not efficient and it has to keep beating a lot. It's not fit. The more exercise you do, the more you train your heart, the lower your heart rate will become. And if your heart rate is low, usually that correlates with a low blood pressure too. So a low resting blood pressure, a low resting heart rate. When your heart rate starts going up, it will need to do that to raise your blood pressure. So when you're exercising, your blood pressure will go up slightly, and your heart rate goes up as well. Yes.
Just back to the question that was asked, which you answered there, whether what we eat is related to our salvation.
Yes.
If God has told us through the spirit of prophecy to not eat in certain things, and we deliberately go against what God has told us not to do, I think that's a very serious situation.
Yes, right. So the question was about fish. God's allowed us to eat fish.
Well,
He's allowed us to eat fish.
Depends on how much.
Well, I don't want to go into a big theological discussion, but when I read the Bible, it says what we can eat and what we can't eat.
I know, but also says that the curse has become more and more on animals and things that were not existing back in the past. The curse on animals is getting worse and worse. And I mean, there is quotations in the Bible that says not 1 ounce of flesh should enter the body. So
there is what? What's that?
Not 1 ounce of flesh should go.
Where does it say that?
In Spirit of Prophecy, right?
Where does it say that?
In the Spirit of Prophecy, I can find it for you.
Okay, but look, if God tells us what we can eat and what we can't eat, unless somebody tells me and shows me that, okay, now it's changed, that the law has now changed, that actually no meat, to eat any kind of flesh is now an anathema to God, then I'd like to see it.
There's several quotations.
But it would have to contradict to what God said before.
No,
because look, there are lots of we can talk about meat, But if I tell you a donut is not healthy for you, I mean, all of that unclean stuff is talking about what's healthy and not healthy. So a donut then becomes an object of, well, is this a sin to eat a donut? And you know, I don't believe God is asking us to be this. What he wants us to do is to have fit, healthy bodies, fit, healthy minds, absolutely. But you know what? Sometimes we will do things that are not as healthy. So if I sit down in front of the TV for 3 hours, that's not healthy. That's another sin that we have to now tick off. You know, and then our lives just become, avoiding sin. That's not how God has designed us. God has designed us, he's given us a great plan and told us to follow it. And I don't think we need to add new laws to his law. Okay, good. Next question. Sorry. Oh, there's somebody there first.
So some of us have kids, and I was just wondering, is there anything you can recommend for us, websites, books, anything, so we can make our children's meals more enriching?
You know, that's a very good point. And I've noticed that there's not an awful lot out there for children's health. There's not an awful lot out there for children's health. I'm looking into it myself. I don't have the answer for you. I'm looking into it myself. I have this idea that we're planning to do in England. So when it gets going, I'm happy to share it with you. But probably by then your children are grown up and off at university. I don't know. But it's certainly something I'm looking into. Because children, if we get children early into healthy habits, that's it. You've won the battle. Okay. So we have. Is this the last question then? Okay. No, there's one question after this one. That's it.
For rheumatic heart disease.
Oh yes.
With mitral stenosis.
Yes.
And you're taking drugs to control the blood pressure and the pulse rate, and also some blood thinner.
Yes.
Is lifestyle change be able to eliminate the drugs that you're taking?
So the question is about rheumatic heart disease, and you have to be on certain drugs to monitor the blood pressure and everything. So rheumatic heart disease, by the way, starts off as an autoimmune problem, right? Rheumatic, like from rheumatoid. So it starts off with your antibodies attacking parts of your heart. And actually, unless you address that, it will continue to get worse. So if the heart has not been so severely damaged, if you have something like rheumatic fever, rheumatic heart disease, the best thing to do is when you look at the life colors, you look at the yellow plan to reduce the number of antibodies attacking you. Now, whether that can get you off of medication, it depends on the severity of the disease. Some people can, because the disease is not so severe, but others may have to continue with it, because once the damage has been done, you can't really reverse the damage of rheumatic heart disease. Thank you. This is the last question.
Okay, to change the subject.
Change the subject, okay.
How do you feel about the flu shots?
Oh, what do I feel about the flu shots? Okay. Yes, I wish I didn't have that one as the last question. Is this still being filmed? Turn the cameras off. No, I don't mind. Very good question, right? I'll be honest with you, I would never take a flu shot in my life. Never. I don't care how sick I am, I'd never take it. And there are many reasons for it, Let me just give you the science first, because sometimes people like me talk off the top of their heads. Only this year, and you can check this up yourself, in the British Medical Journal, they said people taking high-dose vitamin D3 are better at avoiding the flu than anybody taking a flu shot. I mean, it's easy. I'd take the vitamin D over a flu shot. The problem with flu shots, and many of the impurities they have to put in them, is that they cause lots of autoimmune problems. I have seen, personally, I've seen at least a dozen people, women, elderly women, who have had a flu shot by their good doctor, and within months they've developed rheumatoid arthritis. Lupus, multiple sclerosis, all of these things, because your immune system is now heightened, it's much more susceptible to giving you an autoimmune problem. So I don't take flu shots. I don't recommend anybody take flu shots. I'd much rather have the flu than have a flu shot. And by the way, when they give you the flu shot, if you are inclined to have a flu shot, please ask your doctor, if I have this flu shot, doctor, what is the chance that I'm going to get the flu? They'll probably, if they're honest, they'll tell you 80%. So you're taking the flu shot and you've still got an 80% chance of getting the flu. What? And often people get the flu immediately after the flu shot. Why are we... And this is something I've also noticed, certainly in British society, that everybody's almost being forced to have the flu shot. Why? You know, people can't go to school, you can't go to work, doctors, nurses, they're trying to force this on you. I'm always suspicious when we're being forced to take any sort of medication. Never take the flu shot. But thank you for that final question. We're going to go next door. If you have any more questions, if you want to find out any DVDs, and tomorrow we're going to be dealing with depression and anxiety. See you then.
Circle of Hope Network, doing life and being church together.